The champagne bubbles caught the light from our dining room chandelier as I watched my wife thank everyone who made her 37th birthday special. 40 guests packed into our Maine colonial, their faces glowing with wine and good cheer, hanging on every word Rina spoke. "I'm so grateful for all of you," she said, raising her glass toward the crowd. Her auburn hair caught the light perfectly, styled in that effortless way that actually took her an hour to achieve. "This year has been incredible, and I couldn't have done it without everyone who made it so meaningful." I stood up from my chair at the head of our mahogany table, the one we'd bought for our 10th anniversary 3 years ago. The room fell quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the speakers I'd installed last spring. "Including the man you've been visiting every Tuesday?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. June Calrin, Rina's best friend since college, choked on her Merlot. The deep red wine sprayed across the white linen tablecloth, spreading like spilled secrets. Her husband, Brad, noticed immediately that she wasn't confused by my question. She was terrified. "What man?" Rina's mother, Faye Lenton, gripped her daughter's wrist with manicured fingers. The older woman's voice cut through the room like broken glass. "Rina, what is he talking about?" Rina's face had drained of color, but her jaw set in that stubborn line I'd learned to recognize over 13 years of marriage. "Finn, you're embarrassing yourself, and me. Sit down." "Am I?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder thick with papers and photographs. "Because I have 6 months of GPS data from your car, time-stamped photos, and this." I held up a small silver key, the kind used for storage units. The metal caught the light as I turned it slowly between my fingers. "Where did you get that?" Rina's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "From your gym bag, hidden in the little pocket you thought I'd never check." I set the key on the table with a soft clink. "The same gym bag you take every Tuesday when you tell me you're going to yoga class." Judge Soren Valden, Rina's father, had gone completely still in his chair. The distinguished man who'd presided over countless cases in Cumberland County Superior Court was staring at the key like it might explode. "Daddy?" Rina turned to her father, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me. "What do you know, Finn?" the judge asked quietly. "I know that everyone in this room thinks my wife has been having an affair." I opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. But affairs don't require storage units. Affairs don't involve fake identification documents. And affairs definitely don't involve men who are supposed to be gone. June had gone completely white. She grabbed her purse and started to stand, but her husband caught her arm. "Where are you going, honey?" Brad asked. "I thought you wanted to hear what Finn found out about Rina's Tuesday visits." "I need some air," June stammered. "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice made her sink back into her chair. "You're going to want to hear this, June, especially since you notarized the paperwork." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Rina's sister, Emma, leaned forward from across the table. "Notarized what paperwork?" I pulled out a document from the folder and held it up. The paperwork that declared Kian Marin officially gone as of March 15, 2019. The same Kian Marin who my wife visits every Tuesday at Storage Unit 247 on Route 1. Faye Lenton's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor. "Kian is gone, Finn. He's been gone for 4 years." "Has he?" I looked directly at my wife. "Because I followed you last Tuesday, Rina. I watched you unlock that storage unit. I watched you hand him an envelope thick with cash. And I watched him hand you another burner phone to replace the one that got wet last month." Rina finally found her voice. "You're insane. You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain this." I pulled out a bank statement and slid it across the table. "Explain why Kian Marin's life insurance policy paid out $4.2 million to his beneficiary in April 2019. Explain why that same beneficiary has been making regular cash withdrawals every month since then." Judge Valden stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need to make a phone call." "Sit down, Your Honor." The voice came from the front hallway, and every head turned toward the sound. Drake Torrens stepped into the dining room, his federal badge visible on his belt. Behind him came 4 more agents, their presence filling our home with an entirely different kind of authority. "Drake," I said with a nod. "Right on time." "Hello, Finn." My former partner from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit looked around the room with professional interest. "Interesting birthday party you've got here." Rina was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Finn retired from construction management. He builds custom homes." "Actually," Drake said, pulling out his own folder, "Special Agent Finn Harlow took early retirement from the Bureau 18 months ago, after 12 years investigating insurance fraud, money laundering, and organized financial crimes." The silence in the room was absolute now. Even the jazz had stopped playing. "Your FBI?" Emma whispered. "Was FBI," I corrected. "But some cases stay with you even after you turn in your badge." Rina's hands were shaking now. "You investigated me. You married me. And investigated me." "No," I said quietly. "I married you, and then discovered I'd been living with a case I should have solved years ago. The Keon Marin disappearance crossed my desk in 2020. I recognized some of the financial patterns, but I could never prove anything. Not until I started living with the person who was laundering the money." June suddenly bolted from her chair, but Agent Morrison was already moving to block the doorway. "Ms. Calren, we're going to need you to stay for a few questions." "I didn't do anything wrong," June said, but her voice was shaking. "You notarized a document declaring a living man gone," Drake said. "That's federal fraud, June. And since it involved an insurance payout of over $4 million, it's a felony." Brad was staring at his wife with growing horror. "June, what did you do?" "I helped my best friend," June whispered. "Keon was abusive. He controlled everything. When he said he had a way to disappear and start over, I thought I was helping Rina get free." "By committing fraud." Brad's voice was rising. "By stealing $4 million? "It wasn't stealing," Rina said, finally speaking up. "It was his policy. He was the insured party." "But he's not gone," I said. "Which makes it fraud. And every month for 4 years you've been taking cash to him. That's money laundering. And since you've been running it through your interior design business, that's racketeering." Judge Valden had sunk back into his chair, his face ashen. "The probate records. I expedited the probate records." "Yes, you did," Drake said. "We'll need to discuss that separately, Your Honor." Faye Lenton was looking around the room like she was trapped in a nightmare. "The beach house. Rina, you bought the beach house with this money?" "Some of it," Rina admitted. "We deserved that money, Mom. After everything Keon put me through, we deserved it." "You deserve to file for divorce," I said. "You deserve to press charges if he was abusive. You didn't deserve to fake his disappearance and steal $4 million from an insurance company." Emma was crying now. "Rina, how could you do this? How could you involve Dad?" "And June?" "I didn't mean for anyone else to get hurt," Rina said. "It was supposed to be simple. Keon disappears, I collect the insurance money, and we both start over." "Except you didn't start over," I said. "You married me. You brought me into your home, your family, your life, and the whole time you were committing federal crimes." Drake's radio crackled, and he stepped aside to answer it. When he came back, he was smiling grimly. "Unit 247 is secure. Keon Marin is in custody, along with approximately $800,000 in cash and several false identification documents." Rina's shoulders sagged. "How long have you known?" "I started suspecting about 6 months ago," I said. "Little things. Cash transactions that didn't match your business income. Tuesday appointments that never showed up on your actual business calendar. Phone calls you'd take in the other room. But you kept living here. You kept pretending everything was normal. I kept gathering evidence, I corrected, because that's what I do, what I've always done. June was sobbing now. Brad, I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. Rina said Kian would hurt her if she left him normally. So you helped her commit fraud instead? Brad stood up and threw his napkin on the table. You helped her steal millions of dollars and you never thought to tell me? I couldn't tell anyone, June said. That was the whole point. Drake stepped forward with handcuffs. Rina Harlow, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. June Calren, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and falsifying official documents. As the agents read them their rights, I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd known for 3 years. Rina's family, our friends, our neighbors, all of them staring at me like I was a stranger. You could have just divorced her, Emma said quietly. If you knew she was a criminal, why didn't you just leave? Because leaving doesn't stop the crime, I said. And it doesn't get justice for the insurance company that was defrauded, or for all the legitimate claimants whose premiums go up because of fraud like this. So you used us, Faye said. You used our whole family to build your case. I used the evidence your daughter provided by continuing to commit crimes, I said. Every Tuesday for 6 months, she gave me more proof. I just documented it. Drake finished with the handcuffs and turned to Judge Valden. Your Honor, we'll need to schedule a separate interview regarding the expedited probate proceedings. The judge nodded numbly. My career is over. That's not my determination to make, Drake said, but the State Bar Association will certainly want to review your involvement. As the agents escorted Rina and June toward the door, Rina stopped and looked back at me. Did you ever love me? Or was this all just a job to you? I met her eyes across the wreckage of her birthday party. I loved who I thought you were. But that person never existed, did she? I existed, she said quietly. The woman who laughed with you, who planned our future, who wanted children with you. That was real. Built on a lie, I said. Built on stolen money and fake documents and a man hiding in a storage unit. It was still real to me. Drake gently guided her toward the door. We need to go, Mrs. Harlow. After they left, the remaining guests sat in stunned silence. The birthday cake sat untouched on the side table, its 37 candles having burned down to colorful puddles of wax. What happens now? Emma asked. Now the federal prosecutors take over, I said. Rina and June will likely be offered plea deals in exchange for testimony about Kian's role in planning the fraud. Judge Valden will face a separate ethics investigation. I meant what happens to you, Emma said. Where do you go from here? I looked around the dining room, at the chandelier I'd hung, the hardwood floors I'd refinished, the built-in shelving I'd installed over 3 years of believing I was building a home with someone I loved. I go back to work, I said. Drake offered me my old position back. Turns out the Bureau can use someone with my particular experience. And the house? The house was purchased with legitimate funds from my retirement account and Rina's documented business income. The beach house, however, will be seized as proceeds from criminal activity. Faye was crying silently. She's going to prison. Probably, I said. Federal fraud charges carry significant sentences, especially when they involve millions of dollars and years of ongoing criminal activity. You could have warned us, Brad said. You could have told us what was happening before you let it go this far. And compromise a federal investigation? I shook my head. I couldn't risk Rina or June destroying evidence or fleeing. Too much money was involved, and Kian had already proven he was willing to disappear when it suited him. Emma stood up and started gathering dishes with mechanical precision. I need to do something with my hands or I'm going to lose my mind. Leave them, I said. I'll take care of it. No. She kept stacking plates. I need to understand how we missed this, how we all missed that Rina was living a double life. Because she was good at it, I said. And because you loved her. Love makes people want to believe the best about each other. Did you love her? Faye asked. Really? I thought about Tuesday mornings when Rina would kiss me goodbye before her yoga class. I thought about the way she'd curl up next to me on Sunday afternoons, planning our future, talking about the children we'd never have now. I thought about the woman who'd cried in my arms after her grandfather's funeral, who'd surprised me with a weekend in Boston for my 40th birthday, who'd spent hours picking out paint colors for the guest room we'd hoped would become a nursery. Yes, I said. I loved her. That's what made this so hard. But not hard enough to stop you from turning her in. No, I admitted. Not hard enough for that. The room fell quiet again, except for the soft clink of Emma stacking silverware. Outside, I could hear cars starting as the remaining guests made their escape from the wreckage of what was supposed to be a celebration. I should go, Faye said finally. I need to call a lawyer for Rina. She'll be appointed a federal public defender, I said. But yes, you should probably hire someone with experience in white-collar criminal defense. How much will this cost? More than you can afford, I said honestly. Federal defense attorneys who handle complex fraud cases charge several $100s an hour. And the restitution? $4.2 million, plus interest and penalties. The government will seize whatever assets they can find, but Rina and Keon will probably owe millions more than they can ever repay. Faye gathered her purse and coat. You've destroyed my family. No, I said quietly. Your daughter did that when she chose to commit federal crimes instead of getting a divorce. After everyone left, I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the debris of a birthday party that had become a federal crime scene. The champagne had gone flat, the food was getting cold, and there were evidence markers where Drake's team had photographed documents. My phone buzzed with a text from Drake. Keon is talking, says the whole thing was Rina's idea. June is asking about a plea deal. You did good work, Finn. I poured myself a glass of the expensive whiskey Rina had given me for Christmas, the one she'd bought with money stolen from an insurance company. It tasted like regret and justice in equal measure. Tomorrow I'd start the process of disentangling my life from hers. The divorce papers were already prepared, filed under seal until after the criminal proceedings. The house would be mine, but I wasn't sure I wanted it anymore. Too many memories of a woman who'd never really existed. I walked through the rooms I'd thought of as ours, looking at the life we'd built together. The kitchen where she'd taught me to make her grandmother's marinara sauce, the living room where we'd watched movies on Friday nights, the bedroom where she'd whispered plans for our future while hiding the biggest lie of her life. My phone rang. Drake again. How are you holding up? He asked. I've been better, I said. How bad is it going to get? For them? Bad. Keon's looking at 10 to 15 years. Rina probably 8 to 12, depending on her cooperation. June might get off with probation if she testifies. And Judge Valden? That's not our call. But expediting fraudulent probate records for your daughter's criminal conspiracy? The state bar is going to take a very dim view of that. I walked to the window and looked out at the street where I'd lived for 3 years, thinking I was building a normal life with a woman I loved. When do you need an answer about coming back? Take your time, Drake said, but the Portland office could use someone with your experience. And frankly, after living undercover for 3 years without even knowing it, you might be exactly what we need. I wasn't undercover. I was just married to a criminal. Sometimes that's the same thing. After we hung up, I went back to the dining room and started cleaning up. The birthday cake went into the garbage, candles and all. The flowers went into the compost. The photographs and documents went into a box for the federal prosecutors. But I kept the key, the little silver key that had unlocked everything. I set it on my nightstand next to the wedding ring I'd already taken off. Tomorrow I'd start over. New job, new city, new life. But tonight, I sat in the wreckage of the old one, trying to figure out how I'd spent 3 years loving a woman who'd never really existed. 3 weeks after Rina's birthday party, I sat in a sterile conference room at the Federal Building in Portland, watching my wife's life get dissected by prosecutors who spoke about her crimes with the casual precision of surgeons. The financial records show a clear pattern, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Santos said, spreading bank statements across the polished table. Monthly cash withdrawals of $15,000 to $20,000, always on Tuesdays, always from different ATMs along Route 1. Drake nodded from across the table. And the storage unit receipts confirm she's been paying for Unit 247 since April 2019, 1 month after Kian Marin was declared legally gone. I studied the documents with professional detachment, the same way I'd analyzed evidence for 12 years with the Bureau. But these weren't just case files anymore. They were the financial skeleton of my marriage, laid bare under fluorescent lights. "What about the interior design business?" I asked. "How much of that was legitimate?" "About 60%, Santos replied. She had real clients, real projects, but she was also creating fake invoices to justify the cash deposits. Very sophisticated money laundering operation. Sophisticated enough to fool me for 3 years. You weren't looking for it then," Drake pointed out. "You were her husband, not her investigator." My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom wants to know if you'll accept a call from Rina. She's been asking to talk to you." I showed the message to Santos. "What's the protocol here?" "You're not obligated to speak with her," she said. "But if you do, be aware that all calls from the detention center are recorded." "Would it help your case?" "It might. Defendants sometimes say things to family members they won't say to prosecutors." I thought about it for a moment, then typed back to Emma. "Tell her I'll accept one call, tomorrow at 7 p.m. The next evening, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone as it rang exactly at 7. I'd spent the day removing pictures of Rina from the walls, boxing up her belongings, trying to erase 3 years of shared life from our home. "You have a prepaid call from an inmate at Cumberland County Detention Center," the automated voice announced. "This call is being recorded. Do you accept the charges?" "Yes." "Finn?" Rina's voice sounded smaller than I remembered, stripped of the confidence that had always been her trademark. "I'm here. Thank you for taking my call. I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of everything we couldn't take back. "How are you?" she asked finally. "How do you think I am, Rina?" "Angry, hurt, probably relieved that you don't have to pretend anymore." "Pretend what?" "That you loved me, that our marriage was real." I looked around the kitchen where she'd made coffee every morning for 3 years, where we'd planned vacations and argued about paint colors and talked about names for children we'd never have. "Our marriage was real," I said. "It was just built on a lie." Not everything was a lie. The important parts were. The parts about trust and honesty and building a future together. "I wanted those things with you," she said. "I wanted them so badly that I convinced myself the money didn't matter. That Kian didn't matter. That I could just be your wife and forget about everything else. But you couldn't forget. Every Tuesday, you chose him over me. Over us." "I chose survival," she said. "Kian threatened to expose everything if I stopped bringing him money. He said he'd make sure I went to prison for fraud. So you thought you'd just keep committing fraud instead. I thought I could buy time, figure out a way to make it right. By laundering more money, by involving your father and June, by lying to me every single day?" Her voice broke. "I know how it sounds, but I was trapped, Finn. I made one terrible decision 4 years ago, and it just kept getting worse." "You made 100 terrible decisions," I corrected. "Every month for 4 years, you chose to keep lying. Every time you deposited stolen money into our account. Every time you kissed me goodbye before going to see him. I never loved him. Not after what he put me through. But you protected him. You enabled him. You chose him. I chose fear over courage. I chose the easy lie over the hard truth. And I lost everything because of it. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that carried through the phone line and into my kitchen where I'd once believed we were happy. "The prosecutors want me to cooperate," she said. "They want me to testify against Kian, tell them everything about how we planned it." "Are you going to?" "I don't know. If I cooperate, I might get 8 years instead of 15. But Kian says if I testify against him, he'll make sure everyone knows it was my idea from the beginning." "Was it?" Long pause. "Yes." The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd been holding on to some small hope that she'd been coerced, manipulated, forced into a situation beyond her control. "It was my idea," she continued. "Kian was abusive. That part was true. But when I started researching divorce lawyers, I found out about his life insurance policy. $4.2 million if something happened to him." "So you decided to make something happen?" "I decided to make him disappear. Let him start over somewhere else while I collected the money he owed me for 2 years of hell." "Money he owed you?" "For putting up with his abuse. For the bruises and the threats and the nights I slept in the guest room because I was afraid of him." "Rina, that's not how insurance works. That's not how justice works." "I know that now. But 4 years ago, I was desperate and scared, and I thought I was being clever." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where everyone now knew my wife was a federal criminal. Mrs. Patterson across the street had stopped waving when she saw me. The Hendersons had taken down the Christmas lights I'd helped them hang. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to understand why I did it." "I understand. You wanted money more than you wanted integrity." "I wanted freedom more than I wanted to follow rules that never protected me. The rules would have protected you. Divorce court, restraining orders, criminal charges for domestic violence. There were legal ways to get away from him. Legal ways that would have left me with nothing while he kept everything. So you chose illegal ways that left you with nothing anyway, plus federal prison time." "I chose wrong," she admitted. "But I chose out of desperation, not greed. The result is the same either way." Another long silence. I could hear other inmates talking in the background, the institutional sounds of a place where my wife would probably spend the next decade. "Will you visit me?" she asked. "No." "Will you write to me?" "No." "Will you forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long time. Forgiveness was supposed to be about healing, about moving forward, about letting go of anger that only hurt the person carrying it. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe someday, but not now, and not for a long time." "I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you understand what you've done to your family. Your father might lose his judgeship. Your mother had to mortgage the house to pay for your lawyer. Emma can't show her face at work because everyone knows her sister is a federal criminal. I never meant for them to get hurt. But you knew they would. When you involved June, when you asked your father to expedite those probate records, you knew you were dragging them into your crimes." I was desperate. "You were selfish, and you're still being selfish if you think I should visit you in prison or write you letters or pretend that what you did was understandable. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking you to remember that I loved you. I'll remember that you said you loved me, but I'll also remember that you chose to lie to me every day for 3 years. Finn, I have to go, Rina. The divorce papers are being filed next week. Don't contest them." "I won't. I don't have any right to fight for something I already destroyed." "No, you don't. Take care of yourself, Finn. You deserve better than what I gave you." "Yes, I do." I hung up without saying goodbye and sat in the kitchen until the sun went down. Then I called Drake. "How did it go?" he asked. She admitted it was her idea. The whole thing, from the beginning. "That's useful. Will you testify if we need you to?" "About what?" I didn't know anything until 6 months ago. About her behavior during those 6 months, her lies, her trips to the storage unit, her money laundering through the business. If you need me to, yes. Good. And Finn? The job offer is still open. Portland Field Office, White-Collar Crime Division. You could start next month if you want. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast with a woman who was stealing millions of dollars while planning our future. The house felt empty now, not just because she was gone, but because the life we'd built here had never been real. I'll take it, I said, but I want to transfer after the trial, somewhere that doesn't have storage units on Route 1. I'll make some calls, Chicago, Denver, Seattle, plenty of places that need experienced agents. Thanks, Drake. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see how ugly this trial is going to get. He was right about that. Over the next 6 months, as the case moved through federal court, every detail of Rina's crimes became public record. The local newspaper ran weekly updates on the insurance fraud scandal that had rocked our small Maine town. Judge Valden resigned from the bench rather than face impeachment proceedings. June Calren pled guilty to conspiracy and received 2 years probation in exchange for her testimony. And Kian Marin, the man who'd started it all, turned out to be exactly as manipulative as Rina had claimed. From his jail cell, he gave interviews to anyone who would listen, painting himself as the victim of an abusive wife who'd forced him to fake his own disappearance. She threatened to have me framed for domestic violence if I didn't go along with her plan, he told a reporter from the Portland Press-Herald. I was afraid for my life. The story was obviously fabricated, contradicted by years of documented evidence, but it played well with people who wanted to believe that a woman couldn't be the mastermind behind a sophisticated financial crime. Rina's lawyer tried to use Kian's lies to build a defense based on coercion and abuse, but the financial records told a different story. The storage unit was rented in Rina's name. The fake documents were created on Rina's computer. The money laundering operation ran through Rina's business. I testified for 3 hours on a cold February morning, walking the jury through the evidence I'd gathered during my final months of marriage. The prosecutor asked me to explain how the GPS tracking worked, how I'd documented the cash withdrawals, how I'd discovered the storage unit key. Did you love your wife, Agent Harlow? Rina's lawyer asked during cross-examination. Yes. And it must have been difficult to investigate someone you loved. It was necessary. But difficult? Yes, it was difficult. Difficult enough that you might have misinterpreted innocent behavior as criminal activity? I looked across the courtroom at Rina, sitting at the defense table in a conservative blue dress, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd thanked everyone at her birthday party 8 months earlier. There was nothing innocent about visiting a man who was supposed to be gone, I said. There was nothing innocent about laundering $4 million in stolen insurance money, and there was nothing innocent about lying to federal investigators. But you admit you were emotionally compromised during your investigation? I was emotionally invested in discovering the truth. That made me more careful, not less. More careful about building a case against your own wife? More careful about making sure the evidence was accurate and complete. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Rina guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Kian received 12 years. Rina received 9. I wasn't in the courtroom when the sentence was read. I was already in Chicago, starting my new job with the Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit, investigating other people's lies instead of living with them. Emma called me that night. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. I know she is. Are you okay? I'm getting there. Do you hate her? I thought about that question while looking out at Lake Michigan from my new apartment, watching the lights of the city reflect off the dark water. No, I said finally. I don't hate her, but I don't love her anymore either. And I'm not sure which one of those things is worse. 6 months into my new life in Chicago, I thought I'd successfully buried the wreckage of my marriage, along with everything else I'd left behind in Maine. The Bureau kept me busy with cases that required the kind of meticulous financial analysis I'd perfected during the Rina investigation: insurance fraud, corporate embezzlement, cryptocurrency schemes that moved millions of dollars through digital mazes designed to hide criminal intent. I was good at my job, maybe better than I'd ever been, because now I understood viscerally how financial crimes destroyed families, not just balance sheets. Every case file represented someone's trust betrayed, someone's future stolen, someone's faith in other people shattered by greed and lies. My new partner, Agent Lisa Chen, had worked white-collar crime for 8 years without ever taking a case personally. She approached each investigation with professional detachment that I envied and couldn't replicate. "You're going to burn out if you keep treating every fraud case like a personal mission," she warned me over coffee in the Federal Building cafeteria. "These people aren't your ex-wife." I know that. Do you? Because yesterday you spent 4 hours tracking down a victim who lost $12,000 in a romance scam, just to make sure she had resources for counseling. She reminded me of someone. Your mother-in-law? My mother-in-law who mortgaged her house to pay for a lawyer to defend her criminal daughter. Lisa stirred sugar into her coffee and studied my face. "Have you talked to anyone about what you went through? Professional counseling, I mean?" "I talk to you. I'm not qualified to help you process the psychological trauma of discovering your spouse was a federal criminal. There's no trauma, just anger and disappointment and a healthy skepticism about trusting people. That's trauma, Finn. That's exactly what trauma looks like when it's been intellectualized instead of processed." Before I could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and frowned. "New case. Corporate embezzlement at a construction company. Looks like the CFO has been skimming money from employee pension funds. How much? Preliminary estimate is around $3 million over 5 years." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with big financial crime cases. $3 million stolen from people who'd worked their whole lives believing their retirements were secure. "When do we start?" "Now. The company is called Meridian Construction. They're based in Evanston." We spent the rest of the day at Meridian's offices, interviewing employees and reviewing financial records that painted a clear picture of systematic theft. The CFO, a man named Robert Sterling, had been creating fake vendor accounts and authorizing payments to companies that existed only on paper. "How long has this been going on?" I asked the company president, a tired-looking man named Jim Meridian, whose grandfather had started the business in 1952. "We think about 5 years, maybe longer." Robert was very good at hiding what he was doing. "Who discovered it?" "My daughter Sarah. She's an accountant, just graduated from Northwestern. I brought her in to help modernize our bookkeeping, and she noticed discrepancies in the pension fund contributions." Sarah Meridian was 24 years old with dark hair and serious brown eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of Rina at that age. She walked us through the evidence she'd compiled with the kind of methodical precision that made good investigators. "The fake vendor payments always coincided with legitimate pension fund contributions," she explained, pointing to spreadsheets on her laptop screen. "So the cash flow looked normal, but the actual deposits to the pension accounts were consistently short." "How much short?" Lisa asked. "About 15% every quarter for the past 5 years." "And where was that money going?" "Into accounts controlled by Sterling. He was very careful about it, never taking large amounts at once, always making it look like legitimate business expenses." I studied the financial records, noting the sophisticated nature of Sterling's embezzlement scheme. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a carefully planned operation that required extensive knowledge of the company's financial systems. "Where is Sterling now?" I asked. "He disappeared 3 days ago," Jim said. "Right after Sarah confronted him about the discrepancies, cleaned out his office, withdrew money from his personal accounts, and vanished." "Have you contacted local police?" "They said it was a civil matter unless we could prove criminal intent." That's why we called the FBI. Lisa and I exchanged glances. Local police departments often lacked the resources or expertise to investigate complex white-collar crimes, which meant victims had to wait for federal intervention while criminals covered their tracks. We'll need copies of all financial records going back 7 years, I said. Bank statements, vendor contracts, payroll records, pension fund documentation. Whatever you need, Jim said. These people have worked for me for decades. Some of them are ready to retire, and now they're finding out their pensions have been stolen. That afternoon, we interviewed a dozen Meridian employees who'd been counting on pension money that no longer existed. Construction workers in their 60s who'd spent 30 years building other people's homes while Sterling systematically stole their retirement security. I was supposed to retire next year, said Frank Kowalski, a foreman who'd worked for Meridian since 1991. My wife has been sick, needs expensive treatments. We were counting on my pension to cover the medical bills. How much were you expecting? Lisa asked. About $200,000. Now they're telling me it might be half that if we're lucky. I made notes while Frank talked, but I was thinking about all the victims of financial crime I'd met over the years. People like Frank, who'd played by the rules and worked hard and trusted that their employers would honor their commitments. People like me, who'd trusted that their spouses were honest. We're going to find Sterling, I told Frank, and we're going to recover as much of the stolen money as possible. What if you can't find it all? Then the company will be liable for making up the shortfall. Federal law requires employers to maintain adequate pension funding. But what if the company can't afford it? I didn't have a good answer for that question. If Sterling had stolen enough money and hidden it well enough, Meridian Construction might face bankruptcy trying to restore the pension fund, which would mean Frank and the other employees would lose both their jobs and their retirements. That night, I sat in my Chicago apartment, reviewing the Meridian case files and thinking about the parallels to my own experience. Sterling had betrayed people who trusted him, just like Rina had betrayed me. He'd stolen money that wasn't his, just like she had. He'd disappeared when confronted with evidence, just like she'd tried to deny everything until the handcuffs came out. But there was one crucial difference. Sterling's victims were innocent. They hadn't chosen to love a criminal or marry someone whose life was built on lies. They'd simply shown up to work every day and trusted that their employer was honest. My phone rang around 10 p.m. Emma's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Emma. Hi, Finn. I hope I'm not calling too late. It's fine. How are you? I'm okay. Mom's doing better. She found a part-time job at the library, which helps with the mortgage payments. That's good. Rina wanted me to ask if you'd consider writing to her. She's not asking for visits or phone calls, just letters. I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, lights twinkling in office buildings where people were working late, probably some of them committing the same kinds of crimes I investigated every day. No, I said. I told you before, I'm not ready for any contact with her. She's having a really hard time in prison. The other inmates know she's in for white-collar crime, and they don't respect that. She's been threatened, had her belongings stolen. I'm sorry to hear that, but it's not my responsibility anymore. She's still your wife. She's my ex-wife. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. Legally, yes, but emotionally, she stopped being my wife the first time she chose to lie to me about visiting Kian. Everything after that was just me living with a stranger who looked like someone I used to love. Emma was quiet for a moment. You're really not going to forgive her, are you? Forgiveness isn't something you decide to do and then it happens. It's something that might happen over time, or it might not. She made mistakes, Finn. Terrible mistakes. But she's not evil. No, she's not evil. But she's not the person I thought I married either. And I can't build a relationship with someone who doesn't exist. The woman who loved you existed. That part was real. Maybe. But it wasn't enough to stop her from lying to me every day for 3 years. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to focus on the Meridian case instead of the conversation with Emma. But I kept thinking about Rina in prison. dealing with threats and theft and the daily reality of being surrounded by people who'd made different kinds of terrible choices. I didn't want her to suffer, but I also couldn't pretend that her suffering was my problem to solve. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Just like Frank Kowalski was living with the consequences of trusting Robert Sterling. The next morning, Lisa and I drove to Sterling's last known address, a luxury condo in downtown Evanston that had been purchased 2 years earlier for $800,000 in cash. Cash purchase, Lisa noted as we walked through the empty apartment. No mortgage, no paper trail connecting it to his salary from Meridian. Pension fund money, I said, looking around the spacious rooms with their expensive finishes and lake views. This place probably represents about 40 pension payments. We found evidence that Sterling had left in a hurry, clothes scattered in the bedroom, expired food in the refrigerator, mail piled up by the door, but no indication of where he'd gone or how much money he'd taken with him. Bank records show he withdrew $50,000 in cash 3 days ago, Lisa said, checking her phone. Maximum daily withdrawals from multiple accounts. Enough to disappear for a while, but not enough to live comfortably forever. Unless he has other accounts we haven't found yet. We spent the rest of the week tracking Sterling's financial footprint, following electronic trails that led through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. The pattern was sophisticated, but not perfect. Sterling had made the same mistake most embezzlers make, which was believing he was smarter than the investigators who would eventually come looking for him. He's been planning this for months, I told Jim Meridian when we met to update him on our progress. The offshore accounts were established 6 months ago, and he's been moving money incrementally to avoid triggering automatic reporting requirements. How much did he steal total? We're still calculating, but it looks like around $4 million over 6 years. Jim's face went pale. $4 million? That's more than we thought. And it's more than the current value of the pension fund, Lisa added. Even if we recover everything Sterling took, there will still be a shortfall because the remaining investments have lost value. So what does that mean for my employees? It means Meridian Construction is liable for making up the difference. Federal law requires pension funds to be made whole regardless of how the shortfall occurred. And if we can't afford to make up the difference? Then the company faces bankruptcy, and the employees become creditors in the bankruptcy proceedings. Jim sat quietly for a long moment, processing the implications. 70 years in business, 3 generations of my family, and one man destroyed it all. We're going to find him, I said, and we're going to recover as much money as possible. But even if you find every penny, it might not be enough to save the company? That's correct. Then Robert Sterling didn't just steal money, he stole the livelihoods of 60 families. I thought about that observation as we drove back to the federal building. Sterling had done exactly what Rina had done, just on a smaller scale and with different victims. He'd prioritized his own desires over other people's trust, and now multiple families would pay the price for his choices. But unlike Rina, Sterling hadn't been driven by desperation or fear. His embezzlement was purely opportunistic, motivated by greed and enabled by his position of trust within the company. Do you think we'll find him? Lisa asked as we walked into our office. Eventually. He's not sophisticated enough to stay hidden forever, and he doesn't have enough money to disappear permanently. What about the money? Some of it. Maybe half if we're lucky. The rest is probably already converted to assets that will be hard to trace and harder to recover. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Sarah Meridian. Could I buy you coffee? I have some information that might help with the Sterling case. I showed the message to Lisa. What do you think? Could be useful. She's the one who discovered the embezzlement in the first place. We met Sarah at a coffee shop near Northwestern's campus where she was finishing her master's degree in forensic accounting. She'd brought a laptop and a stack of printouts that looked like they represented hours of additional analysis. I kept digging after we talked, she said, opening the laptop. And I found something you should see. She pulled up a spreadsheet that tracked Sterling's embezzlement month by month, but with additional data I hadn't seen before. What am I looking at? I asked. Sterling wasn't working alone. Look at these patterns. She highlighted several entries that showed pension fund withdrawals, coinciding with legitimate vendor payments to a company called North Shore Consulting. North Shore is a real company, she explained. They do environmental assessments for construction projects. But look at the payment amounts. I studied the numbers. North Shore's invoices were consistently 15 to 20% higher than comparable services from other environmental consulting firms. Inflated invoices, Lisa said. Sterling was working with someone at North Shore to overcharge for services, then splitting the difference. Exactly. And look who signed off on all the North Shore contracts. Sarah pulled up another document showing approval signatures. Every contract with North Shore had been personally approved by Jim Meridian. Your father knew about this? I asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Either he was involved, or Sterling forged his signatures. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with realizing a case was more complicated than it initially appeared. If Jim Meridian was involved in Sterling's embezzlement, then our investigation had just become an inquiry into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the company. Have you talked to your father about this? No. I wanted to talk to you first. If Dad is involved... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Then he's committed federal crimes and will face prosecution, I said gently, just like anyone else would. But he's my father, and if he goes to prison, the company definitely goes bankrupt. 60 families lose their jobs, and all those workers lose their pensions. Sarah, you can't protect your father from the consequences of his choices. If he committed crimes, he has to face justice. Even if it destroys everything he's built, even if it hurts innocent people. I thought about my own experience with that question. I could have confronted Rina privately, given her a chance to confess and make restitution without involving federal prosecutors. It might have saved her family from public humiliation and financial ruin, but it also would have meant letting her escape justice for stealing $4 million. Yes, I said. Even then. Sarah closed her laptop and gathered her papers. I need to think about this. Sarah, if you withhold evidence from a federal investigation, you could face obstruction charges yourself. I understand, but I need time to process what this means for my family. After she left, Lisa and I sat in the coffee shop, both of us thinking about the implications of what we'd learned. If Jim Meridian was involved, this case just got a lot more complicated, Lisa said. And a lot more personal for Sarah. She's the one who discovered her father's crimes, just like I discovered Rina's. Except Sarah has a choice about what to do with the information. No, she doesn't. Not really. Once you know someone you love has committed federal crimes, you only have two choices: become complicit or turn them in. Is that what you told yourself when you decided to investigate Rina? I thought about that question while we drove back to the federal building. Had I really had a choice, or had I simply convinced myself that duty trumped love? I told myself that justice mattered more than my personal feelings, I said finally. Whether that was true or just a rationalization, I'm still not sure. Do you regret it? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the woman I loved turned out to be someone who could steal millions of dollars and lie about it for years. But I don't regret stopping her from continuing to commit crimes. Even though it destroyed your marriage and her family? The crimes destroyed those things, not my investigation. I just documented what was already broken. That night, I called Drake to update him on the Meridian case and ask his advice about handling Sarah's potential evidence. If Jim Meridian is involved, you have to pursue it, he said. You can't ignore evidence of federal crimes just because it complicates the case. I know, but I keep thinking about Sarah, having to choose between protecting her father and doing the right thing. Sounds familiar. Yeah, it does. Except I didn't have a choice about investigating Rina. I was already living with the evidence. You had a choice about what to do with it. You could have confronted her privately, given her a chance to confess and make restitution, and let her escape justice, or given her a chance to take responsibility for her actions without involving federal prosecutors. I'd never considered that possibility seriously, but now I wondered if I'd been too quick to treat my wife like any other criminal suspect. Would that have been the right thing to do? I don't know, Drake said, but it might have been the loving thing to do. The next morning, Sarah called and asked to meet with us again. This time, she brought her father. Jim Meridian looked like he'd aged 10 years since our last meeting. His face was drawn, his hands shaking slightly as he sat across from us in the Federal Building conference room. Sarah told me what she found, he said without preamble. And she's right. I was involved. I activated the recording device and read him his rights while Lisa took notes. Jim waived his right to an attorney and began explaining his role in Sterling's embezzlement scheme. It started small, he said. Robert approached me about inflating some vendor invoices to cover unexpected project costs. He said it was temporary, just until we got through a cash flow problem. When was this? I asked. About 3 years ago. We'd had some big projects go over budget, and I was worried about making payroll. So you agreed to inflate invoices from North Shore Consulting? Yes, but I thought it was just for a few months, and I thought the money was going back into company operations. When did you realize Sterling was stealing the money? About 6 months ago. I started noticing that our cash flow problems weren't getting better despite the additional revenue from North Shore. When I asked Robert about it, he said the money was being used for pension fund contributions. But it wasn't? No, he was depositing just enough to maintain the appearance of proper funding while stealing the rest. Sarah was crying quietly in the corner of the room. I could see her struggling with the realization that her father wasn't the man she'd believed him to be. Why didn't you stop it when you realized what was happening? Lisa asked. Because by then I was complicit. If I reported Robert, I'd have to admit my own involvement. I thought I could find a way to fix it without anyone getting hurt. By continuing to participate in the fraud? By trying to recover the stolen money and make the pension fund whole again. I was working on a plan to sell company assets and use the proceeds to restore the fund. But you never implemented that plan? Robert disappeared before I could. And now Sarah has discovered everything anyway. I looked at Sarah, whose face was a mixture of grief and determination. She'd made the same choice I'd made with Rina, justice over family loyalty. I'm sorry, Jim said to his daughter. I'm sorry you had to be the one to discover this, and I'm sorry I put you in a position where you had to choose between protecting me and doing the right thing. I love you, Dad, Sarah said. But I can't let you destroy other people's lives to protect yourself. I know, and I'm proud of you for making the right choice, even though it's going to cost our family everything. Over the next week, we unraveled the full scope of the conspiracy between Jim Meridian and Robert Sterling. The total amount stolen was actually closer to $5 million, spread across multiple schemes involving inflated invoices, fake vendor payments, and systematic pension fund theft. Sterling remained missing, but we'd frozen his known assets and issued federal warrants that would make it difficult for him to access banking systems or travel internationally. Jim Meridian pled guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and embezzlement. He agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation and to liquidate all personal assets to help restore the pension fund. It won't be enough, he told me during one of our final interviews. Even if you recover everything Robert stole, and even if I sell everything I own, there will still be a shortfall of at least $2 million. What will happen to the company? Bankruptcy. We can't afford to make up the shortfall, and we can't operate without the trust of our employees or our clients. And the workers? They'll lose their jobs and most of their pensions. 70 years of my family's work, destroyed because I made one terrible decision, and then kept making worse ones trying to cover it up. I thought about that conversation as I wrote my final report on the Meridian case. Jim Meridian wasn't evil, just like Rina wasn't evil. But he'd made choices that prioritized his own interests over other people's trust, and now dozens of families would pay the price for those choices. The difference was that Jim had shown genuine remorse and taken responsibility for his actions. He'd cooperated fully with our investigation, even when it meant implicating himself in additional crimes. Rina had never done that. Even after her arrest, even during her trial, she'd continued to minimize her role and blame others for her choices. Maybe that was why I still felt angry about Rina's betrayal, but only sad about Jim's. Anger was for people who refused to acknowledge the harm they'd caused. Sadness was for people who understood the consequences of their actions but couldn't undo them. Sarah Meridian called me the day after her father was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for treating him fairly throughout the investigation. He made it easy by cooperating and telling the truth. Still, I know it couldn't have been comfortable for you, given your own experience with a spouse who committed federal crimes. How did you know about that?" "I looked you up online after we first met. I found articles about your ex-wife's case." "And what did you think?" "I thought you must understand what it feels like to love someone and discover they're not who you thought they were." "Yes, I understand that." "Do you think I did the right thing, turning in my own father?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. "I think you did the only thing you could live with," I said finally, "just like I did." "Do you ever regret it?" "Every day, but not enough to wish I'd made a different choice." "That's exactly how I feel." After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at Lake Michigan and thinking about the parallels between the Meridian case and my own experience. Both involved people we loved betraying our trust. Both required us to choose between family loyalty and justice. Both left us questioning whether we'd done the right thing. But there was one crucial difference. Sarah had discovered her father's crimes and immediately sought help from law enforcement. I had discovered Rina's crimes and spent 6 months gathering evidence before turning her in. Maybe that was why I still felt conflicted about my choices. I'd acted like an investigator instead of a husband, building a case instead of trying to save my marriage. Or maybe that was just another rationalization, and the truth was simpler. Once trust is broken, it can't be repaired. Once you know someone you love is capable of systematic deception, you can never really trust them again. Either way, the result was the same. Rina was in prison, Jim Meridian was in prison, and Robert Sterling would join them as soon as we caught him. Justice had been served, but dozens of families had been destroyed in the process. I closed the Meridian case file and put it in my desk drawer next to all the other files representing other people's broken trust and shattered families. Tomorrow, there would be new cases, new victims, new criminals who'd convinced themselves they were too smart to get caught. But tonight, I just wanted to go home to my empty apartment and try to forget that the world was full of people who chose greed over integrity, lies over truth, and self-interest over the trust of people who loved them. Some days, I wondered if I'd chosen the right profession for someone who'd lost faith in other people's honesty. Other days, I thought it was exactly the right profession for someone who understood how much damage financial crimes could cause. Either way, I was good at my job. And in a world full of Robert Sterlings and Kian Marins and even people like Rina who convinced themselves their crimes were justified, that had to be enough.